You're not free. You're not even close to free.
In the last episode, we got a little wide and starry-eyed as I introduced you to your alien cortex and explained where it came from. I also told you a little snake and bull story or two, and you discovered God. Now it's time to meet the rest of the cranial cast and crew. Welcome to the zoo in your head. Let's start by asking a simple question. Has the world gone completely bonkers? Well, it's a hard question to answer, because the correct word, psychosis, is pejorative, it's highly emotive, and it's not that well defined. The collective coined the term psychosis to label and stigmatize individuals, not normally the other way around. And what lunatic or collection of lunatics is really capable of objectively evaluating their own sanity anyway? Perhaps you could use the criteria of survival. If your current frame of mind does not promote survival, then it must be toxic and it must be terminal. And what lunatic in the current world would not say that your survival is at risk from your current frame of mind?
News flash, it turns out your planetary Titanic has armies of them enjoying the sunshine up on the first-class decks.
And they've just figured out how to use the intercom system, so listen up and hear what they have to say.
In measure after measure, life has been getting better, and it's not the kind of development that you could learn about reading the papers. Quite the contrary, of a fact that most people are unaware of, namely that in most measures, life has gotten better over time.
If you look at the data, that things are getting better at a rate that's so remarkable that it is really nothing short of miraculous. And you produce dozens of graphs showing that in Enlightenment Now.
Now here's a little pop quiz for linear thinkers like Pinky and Perky in that clip. Let's assume you have a wine fermentation vat in which yeast cells double every minute for a full day as the fermentation process progresses. When midnight strikes, all the unicellular organisms have metabolized all the available sugar into alcohol. It's curtains for the microorganisms at that stage and party time for Dionysus. At the stroke of midnight, the fermentation process stops because there's no more sugar for them to eat, and in addition the alcohol they produced poisons them all. They drown in their own poisonous poop. Okay? Now here's the question. When is the fermentation process half complete? Is it at high noon, or is it at 1 minute before midnight? Since the microorganisms double every minute, they are actually at the halfway point a minute before midnight. Up until that last minute, things look great. In fact, if you graph it out linearly, like your alien cortex prefers to, statistically speaking, things look really awesome for the microbes. And they just get better the whole dang day, right up to the last 60 seconds. It's easy at the 11th hour to point out that never have so many of them been eating and eating so damn well. And ironically, statistically speaking, everything looks the most rosy a minute before the lights go out. Do you get the difference between a linear and a nonlinear process now? Now, here's a follow-up question. What's the gas those microorganisms produce during the fermentation process? Yes, it's CO2. Remember CO2, the greenhouse gas killing your planet? Does that ring any bells for you? Be careful. In the insane asylum you are in now, the most insane patients of all tend to have doctorates, and they are drunk on science and engineering, which is mere seconds away from turning your planet into the metaphorical equivalent of worthless, poisonous, undrinkable vinegar. Remember, alien cortexes are linear and two-dimensional, and think in terms of frames, which is why they have a fatal attraction for graphs and Cartesian plots.
Oh no, we're two-dimensional! I'm lacking depth!
The sun is setting on your global fermentation vat. So yes, expect the linear thinking fools to all be out fiddling on the roof. It's part of your collective psychosis. According to cultural norms, a diagnosis of psychosis in an individual is spectacularly bleak. So if there's a mass psychosis going on, everybody has a dog in the fight, but not everybody has the courage to face facts and come up with the most final, the scariest and most defeatist of all diagnoses: psychosis. Mass psychosis. No one can deny that psychosis is a very, very scary thing. The World Health Organization, or WHO, ranks psychosis as the third most disabling medical condition in the world, after respiratory diseases and diarrhea, and higher than paraplegia and blindness. But respiratory diseases and even diarrhea don't have anywhere near the frightening stigma that a diagnosis of psychosis has. The WHO estimates that 1 in 4 people will suffer from a mental or neurological disorder in their lives, but only about 450 million, or 6%, are suffering from a mental disorder at any one time. Let's disregard for the moment that the Pew Research Center reports that 75% of Americans of all ages and sexes across the board admit to having an imaginary friend in the sky that they talk to on a regular basis. Those people are classed as sane. The rule seems to be that if everybody's doing it, then it's okay. It's normal behavior, like ecocide in other words. So if you ignore the apocalyptic media hype and go by the numbers, if 94% of people are supposedly free of mental disorders according to the WHO, does that mean in effect that the world on the whole is currently reasonably sane? Perhaps you haven't heard of an all too tragically common logical error called the fallacy of composition. It's wrong to conclude that just because all or most of the parts of something have some quality, that automatically means the whole must have that quality too, perhaps even in abundance. For example, add a list of odd numbers together and you can't assume that the result must necessarily be odd just because its parts are. Just as you can't automatically assume a dozen world-class chefs shoved into a kitchen together are bound to produce a world-class meal just because each of them can individually. They might all be prima donnas and work dreadfully together.
What are you?
An idiot sandwich.
The meal could all turn out to be a spectacular mess, and you might wind up having to order in pizza. And the converse is also true. As the producers found to their horror, if you make a show with a dreadful premise from a dreadful script using dreadful actors, you might accidentally wind up with a Broadway hit. So perhaps ironically, even if everyone on your planet is sane, you might collectively still be totally mashugana. Just as everyone in a corporation might be nice as pie and the salt of the earth. But collectively?
We can go through the characteristics that define this particular disorder one by one and see how they might apply to corporations. They would have all the characteristics. And in fact, in many respects, a corporation of that sort is the prototypical psychopath.
And so goes the world. A journey of 1,000,000 rational steps can nonetheless lead to a very insane place. Iconic economist snake oil salesmen like Adam Smith and David Ricardo have led you into bedlam, right into the snake pit. You see, Adam Smith believed that if everybody behaved rationally and freely, and in particular looked after their own rational self-interest, then the outcome would be rational and therefore best for everybody. The invisible hand of the market would move to make sure that that was so. Unfortunately for you, you built a whole culture based on his misunderstanding, and it's led you to a very strange place. You now find yourself in the Anthropomorphocene or Holocene extinction event, the great dying or ecocide that's occurred 200 years after Smith had his bright idea. One obvious consequence of Smith's philosophy was global overpopulation, something which he never foresaw. Dr. Neo von Cortex once wrote in some pretty prestigious science journals that overpopulation was a myth, because with an increased population comes more grey matter to solve the problems that an increased population creates. He must have been killing himself laughing on the inside, because intellectual peacocks actually received it quite well. They thought it was quite good wisdom. But think it through. If Matt Damon is out on Mars and he doesn't have enough food and water to survive, then according to the logic, what he really needs is not more provisions. He needs 7.5 billion people to step through the airlock and come and join him. Because with all that grey matter, all his provisioning problems will be solved in next to no time, right? Anybody interested in another nice helping of Soylent Green?
They've got to tell people.
Tell them what?
The ocean's dying. The plankton's dying. It's people. Soylent Green is made out of people.
But anyway, I wouldn't worry too much about global overpopulation. Eugenicists like Dr. Neo von Cortex have that covered. He was heavily involved with Epicite and Monster Insanito to create GMO contraceptive corn in America and a large number of other secret population control eugenics experiments.
Thanks to Monster Insanito, there'll be no children of the corn. And in America, just about everything they feed the lower classes is a corn derivative. And if you ask Dr. von Cortex why the sperm count in men has dropped 60% in just 3 decades, he just laughs with knowing and uncontrollable laughter. That's laughter without the S, by the way. But then again, who knows? But don't assume that the Illuminati have absolutely everything under control. These days your economist brain boxes are slightly baffled. They simply can't understand how 7.5 billion people behaving rationally has resulted in such a mess, including so many people, and all on their watch. I mean, how could their patron saint, Adam Smith, have been so horrendously and spectacularly wrong when he assumed that self-regulation was built into the system? Was it perhaps the fault of those meddling politicians and diaper socialists that ruined the perfect Smith souffle? Or perhaps it was what psychologists tell you, that it was actually people not behaving quite rationally enough. I mean, what would you prefer, that people started behaving completely irrationally? Well, actually, yes. Contrary to what psychologists and economists tell you, you're actually suffering from an overdose of rationality. They themselves, with their anti-Midas touch, exemplify it. That overdose of rationality is due to the excessive dominance of your alien cortex. Your alien cortex defines mental disorder as anything contrary to its unnatural obsession with order, through nothing more than the narcissism of self-reference. Your alien cortex is quite literally addicted to rationality and order, to a dopamine fix it gets from them. But unlike a regular addict, it can't give up on them and kick the habit, because giving up on rationality and order would mean giving up on itself, and that would be the death of it.
And yet, tragically, it can't not give up on it either, because if it keeps up with its lethal habit, it's clearly going to exacerbate the ecocidal death spiral it's got itself into.
And here things get exceedingly dark, because when an alien cortex corners itself that way, then it normally does what scorpions are supposed to do when they're surrounded by fire, according to the urban myth. They sting themselves to death, taking everything they can down with them out of sheer spite.
You hear that? You hear that? Therefore, they're superfluous. So what do we need them for? String them up at once. String them up, liars, traitors, corruption, all of you.
As one of the members of the Columbine duo wrote, "The human race isn't worth fighting for, only worth killing. Give the earth back to the animals. They deserve it infinitely more than we do. Nothing means anything anymore."
But there's still a way out. Don't give up on escape just yet. In order to survive, the supposedly rational and sane parts need to make a forbidden move, a radical departure from the norm. What you need to do is to make a collective decision to stop drinking the alien cortex Kool-Aid and decide to go irrational, absolutely insane, psychotic, en masse.
Now I can hear you say, there's no way I'm going to be doing that. What, are you crazy? I have responsibilities. I have a job to hold down. I mean, what would the neighbors say? Well, that's fine. Just have it your way. Go extinct then. You know, survival's not mandatory. You're the sane one after all, not me. I understand how absolutely, totally busy you are at the moment and how you can't afford to spare the time to save your home planet. That's fine with me. After all, it's not my home planet.
The builders of our world.
Being crazy is not painful. It's being half crazy that's painful. That's like being born halfway. You're really all half mad, particularly in the left brain hemisphere, which is a sure recipe for a total abortion on a global scale. The existential pain and misery you feel really comes from you all desperately trying to hold on to your sanity at all costs. So why not give in and let go? You'd be insane not to. Throughout the known universe, the only known way to dethrone an alien cortex is to go completely and utterly psychotic. While you're partially psychotic, the alien cortex will ladle on the suffering in the phrase, suffers from mental illness. If you want to save your species, you shouldn't be pathologizing and stigmatizing psychosis. It ought to be celebrated in those around you, on the rare occasions when grace allows it to happen.
Hey! Come back! Stop! Stop!
And the demons went out of the man and into the pigs.
You see, not all psychotic breakdowns, or what psychiatrists call conversions, are created equally. Hidden by all the run-of-the-mill psychoses is another sort of psychosis, a transformative and beneficial one. Let's call it eupsychosis. Eupsychosis is the antidote to all the ills of your society, to eugenics and genomics, the increasingly popular stealth science, where you secretly pull a GM Frankenrabbit out of your head or hat and shove it up your species' rectum. That's the wrong kind of transformation of your species. Eupsychosis is the guided art of the shamans and mystics, the transformative art your modern-day quacks forgot. This is not schizophrenia or mania. Schizophrenia and mania are failed attempts in an individual to achieve the process of division, dissolution, reintegration, and self-actualization. It's what laymen would loosely call a religious experience. When it occurs spontaneously, doctors would most commonly identify it with temporal lobe epilepsy, the divine affliction, known since antiquity as the sacred disease.
Yeah, if you were to ask my dad, he would just say I am completely through the gateway and into another reality 100%. I've been in so much pain that I'd rather be shot to death, dude, or just whipped to death.
But also joy?
Yeah, I've been in so much joy that I would rather be left alone. Take everything away and just let me sit there and have that much joy.
People think that epilepsy is divine simply because they don't have any idea what causes epilepsy. But I believe that someday we will understand what causes epilepsy, and at that moment we will cease to believe that it's divine. And so it is with everything in the universe. When Hippocrates wrote that, his alien cortex was obviously just being a complete hypocrite. The real affliction your species is suffering from is the alien cortex. The alien cortex knows that eupsychosis will kill it, so it labels the cure as the disease. It's the familiar old alien cortex defensive tactic of inversion once again. The world-renowned expert on religious experiences, William James, once confided that he couldn't, in all honesty, tell the difference between a genuine religious experience and common or garden psychosis. That's because, in truth, there is no difference between the two. As you deliberately go psychotic, the neurons in your temporal lobes will scream. They'll ignite a firestorm of electrical activity in your brain which will illuminate the vast caverns of your mind in an infinite regress. You'll feel the gods and demons churning the great ocean of poisonous milk in your head to the sweet butter of self-realization, and ultimately escape. You'll be transformed, but you'll not be able to retain everything you see on the fantastic journey. A camera cannot really take a complete picture of itself. Even in a mirror, The stomach cannot really digest itself, and a computer cannot really be its own complete catalogue and index down to the last bit.
You know, insanity isn't probably nearly as bad as you think it is once you step through the looking glass and emerge on the other side. Once you do that, you're free, you're home. You are forever relieved of duty from the alien cortex's global suicide project. But for alien cortex's sake, if you decide to board the crazy train, then take it to the very last stop and beyond. Don't stop halfway, otherwise you'll come out half-baked. You'll wind up like this guy.
Even the Piraha people qualify as insane according to Adam Smith's yardstick. And who would you rather spend eternity with? Marooned and adrift in space on Mothership Earth, Smith or the Piraha?
They call themselves the Hiaichehe, which means the straight one. And our language is Apagaiso, a crooked head, a twisted head.
Now, I severely doubt that I cured you of modern medicine in episode 2, part 1. I'm sure you can't even remember what that's about now. But I'm sure some of you are thinking, if there really is a global epidemic of psychosis, then shouldn't professionals be dealing with that? Shouldn't we be training armies and armies of psychiatrists and sending them out into the field to deal with it? Shouldn't we be putting Thorazine or maybe lithium in the water? Shouldn't Big Pharma be dealing with that kind of thing? You see, the psych professionals are a large part of the problem. Their job, as they see it, is to rescue lost sheep from personal insanity so that they can return them safely to the alien cortex's global, mass-shared delusional disorder. It's Causi Sui project, or self-creating or self-causing project, which is actually a suicidal project, though it doesn't realize it.
Just thinking about the whole damn thing is enough to drive you stark raving mad. And so naturally their workload is increasing exponentially as some of you start doing just that, thinking. So very soon you'll all be insane. The problem is that you won't be insane enough, soon enough, or in the right way. And in the meantime, since the psych profession doesn't really know what it's doing, doctors and patients are just going to carry on harming each other in a huge circular farce.
So I think it would be useful if we started by your telling me something about your state of mind at the moment. How would you describe it? Would you say you were happy or depressed, confident or unsure of yourself? What words would you use to describe your mood, would you say? Take your time.
Fascinating, absolutely fascinating. Your problem seems to center around the delusion that you are a psychiatrist and that everyone you speak to is a patient of some sort. This is a rare but not unheard of syndrome.
You remember how I told you in the last episode that one of the alien cortex's favorite power plays and dominant strategies is making lists? This is one of the longest, scariest, and most dangerous of its lists you can ever have the misfortune to come across. It's called the DSM, or the Diagnostic Sorcery Manual. There are now 5 editions in a series that started out life as a short pamphlet in the US Army during World War II, and wound up being this 947-page monster of social injustice and violation of civil liberties that you see today. The first pamphlet was created by this man, Brigadier General William C. Menninger, who we now believe was actually a secret agent for the Neocortex Foundation. The fact that he listed passive aggressiveness as the leading psychiatric disorder in the US military says just about everything you need to know about the DSM. The DSM claims to be based on sound scientific statistics, but it's all a lie. Statistically speaking, in a blind test, no 2 doctors can agree on the same diagnosis in the DSM for the same patient. Yet through the DSM, the law gives licensed quacks more raw, carte blanche, unconstitutional personal power over their patients' lives than it allows the Legislative Assembly, the President, or a legally constituted judge and jury. You could be forgiven for thinking that books like the DSM were all left back in the Dark Ages or on a bonfire in colonial Salem, Massachusetts. But no. Instead, along with its autobiography, the Bible, your alien cortex has secretly just about built your whole culture around it. At a cost of around $200 per copy, you may be surprised to hear that this other Bible of the mental health profession is also a bestseller. But that's not really surprising once you know that the DSM is basically just a long list of health insurance billing codes that psychiatrists use for generating new patients, lawyers use for legal maneuvering, and Big Pharma uses for generating its obscene profits. Just say no to all the drugs, labels, and identities that an alien cortex will try and push on you. It'll always try and sell you the very thing that you should be trying to get rid of, a new ego. When people find their alien cortex disintegrating, they normally panic through cultural indoctrination and ignorance. They'll seek out a doctor and collude with them to try and weave a rational narrative around their disintegration. Together they'll pick a label, they'll cast magic hexes at the problem, and they'll make sacrifices of large sums of money to the god Big Pharma. Once you've agreed to be yoked by an alien cortex's identity, then it's won the dominance game. Disintegration becomes reintegration into its tyranny. In all its pages of exhaustive pejoratives, here is a list of 3 glaring omissions from the Quack's Diagnostic Bible. 1. The precise definition of a mentally healthy person. 2. Any suggestion that the authors of the DSM are insane themselves, although they clearly are in the light of their other Bible, Matthew 7 verse 1. 3. Any mention of psychosis, or the transformative good kind of psychosis that leaves you egoless, liberated, unlabeled, self-esteem free and identity free. The psych profession doesn't seem to realize that there even is such a thing as psychosis, even though it once defined the shamanic age that long predated their profession by eons. The secret art of metamorphosis was carried forward in the mystery schools. It went underground as medieval alchemy, and in spite of the Catholic Church, it sneaked through the Renaissance. Vestiges of it still echo through to this very day. Until Plato deliberately obfuscated and buried the truth about the mystic Socrates, everyone knew that when Socrates said that he was like a midwife, it was not because he delivered wisdom to nascent intellectuals, but because he purposefully drove people mad in order to provoke their psychic rebirth. He said repeatedly that there was no wisdom in him, except the wisdom to drive people completely out of their sanity. By comparison, modern psychiatrists behave a bit like barren, panicked, and demented midwives who try to push babies back into the womb in the middle of their psychological birthing process. And then they point to the abortion they create to show how terrible this metaphorical childbirth is and why it should be detected early and prevented at all costs. The professionals drown psychotics in the very waters where the mystics frolic. So in order for them not to drown you, it's very important that you not be rescued by anybody. Even a guru clown or shaman that looks like they know how to tread water. In order to complete your transformation successfully, you need to accept that you are actually all alone on this journey, where all the so-called guardians are like blind caterpillars trying to bind the cracks in the metamorphosizing chrysalis of those precious few among you that are capable of becoming butterflies. For a caterpillar to turn into a butterfly, it dissolves itself with enzymes triggered by hormones. The psych profession and Big Pharma make it their business to block those hormones, claiming that they're a chemical imbalance in your brain. Here's a pro tip. If a psych professional ever tries to sell you on the idea that you have a chemical imbalance in your brain, then ask them which chemicals exactly and what the balance should be in a normal healthy person. And ask them how they measure it. What's the clinical test? If they can't tell you exactly, then if you're not chained to a gurney, my advice is simply to walk out. If psychiatrists knew their job, then they would steer patients on a bad trip, away from Big Pharma and towards psychosis. They could learn a lot from the psychedelic trip guides. Never fight it, go with the flow. Friends and family should be waiting outside the delivery room with a positive attitude and nervously expectant. And after the big day, the great delivery, no matter what comes out, it should be celebrated and screw the world's plan. The normie wagon is heading to the collective slaughterhouse step by rational step. The problem with rationality is that it at least pretends to be consistent, complete and predictable as clockwork. It isn't, but we'll leave that mind-blowing truth for a later episode. The thing is, anything that runs like clockwork is easy to exploit. You're easy to farm, in other words. and Big Pharma is out to farm you. So put that on a t-shirt.
The 1% know that it's really hard to milk a mad cow, and it's almost impossible to make a living out of a truly random number generator. That's why even casinos don't even try.
It's important for you to realize that most chattel slavery is predicated on the clock, represented by the god Kronos. But if you have existential doubts and the start of alien cortex disintegration, even if it was directly induced accidentally by your sick society, mental health professionals will tell you to get back into society as quickly as possible. Get back into the womb, in other words. Get a job and stick to the clock. And that's partly why you're all depressed, anxiety-ridden slaves today in that clockwork lemon. Unfortunately, if you're predictable, clockwise, and not haywire, then it's only a matter of time before some alien cortex somewhere considers you their lunch. So according to the psychiatric profession, corporations and the clergy, sanity implies slavery, and slavery is their twisted version of the realities of life.
That's what life is like. It's suffering. That's what the religious people have always said. Life is suffering. Yes.
Now let's just say I piqued your interest in a trip to Crazy Town. How would you even go about getting there? Well, how about taking a magical mystery tour on the shamanic tour bus?
Ken Kesey and his band of merry pranksters painted an old school bus and drove it across the country on a trip that would steer society into a new era. That journey set off a ripple effect that would influence pop culture into this day and age. The Further bus gave birth to the psychedelic movement and laid the foundation for music festivals as we know them today.
Well, for alien cortex sake, don't take psilocybin, peyote, LSD, DMT or ayahuasca or any other psychotropic or mind-altering substances, whatever you do. In the Gulag urine, yeah-man shamans and indigenous shamans, Svengali characters and guru clowns may try to give you a guided tour of what it's like on the outside of your prison. Put the psycho into psychopomp, in other words. But they can only give you a temporary excursion to Never Neverland. It's psychic tourism. It's a weird foreign movie without subtitles. It's the difference between the full immersion virtual reality experience of the phoenix or rising from the ashes and actually being it. Once again, it's just the familiar old alien cortex substitution defensive play. And afterwards, in order to make further progress, you'll probably have to spend ages backtracking and unlearning everything you think you know. So it's better not to take that trip. Otherwise you might think you know a place that you really don't.
And don't forget the social backlash. Back in the Stone Age, the 60s era psychedelic movement started stalking your alien cortex, and it really freaked it out. It shut it down with a vengeance that still reverberates through your society to this very day.
When choosing a train to board on the way in, it's important to know that the preparation ethos and intent surrounding your psychosis will shape the quality and permanency of your transformation. If you're stuck in a neural rut, psychotropic drugs can help you grow some new dendritic connections and branch out. Sure, ayahuasca may be great for helping you stop smoking or to help you get an insight into the fact that you're on the wrong life path, perhaps. But that's chicken feed. Unless you break through to a permanent cosmic consciousness in one fell swoop, you may as well vape yourself to death as your planet goes up in smoke. True awakening is not incremental or gradual. It's sudden, catastrophic, terminal, and for keeps. It's just like your ecocide, except this way you get to cheat death and live. Psychotropic drugs just allow you to take a quick and temporary peek through the keyhole of the doors of perception. It's just a movie of true liberation. A trap. They're false windows on eternity that in the end will trap you like a bug.
So given the right tools and techniques, you don't need to poison yourself in the Amazon, take psychedelics or drink any New Age Kool-Aid. DMT may be a Schedule 1 drug, but your brain produces it naturally. Only a psychiatrist can lock you up for making full use of the chemistry lab between your two ears. The best kind of transformation is the neutral, vanilla kind. The legal kind that you can do on your own without assistance.
That's because the trajectory you have going into realization forever taints the outcome and flavors and colors your enlightenment on the other side of the looking glass. So be careful to cover your tracks and make sure you stick to a neutral, no-name brand psychosis.
and not one tainted by someone else's philosophy or religion. Purity and clarity going in means purity and clarity coming out. Sure, you can have an old-school religious conversion within the context of some branded orthodox religion or mystic school, but it's a second-rate and tainted imitation of true awakening.
Let us, like him, hold up one shoe and let the other be upon our foot, for this is his sign that all who follow him shall do likewise.
Yes. No, the shoe is a sign that we must gather shoes together in abundance.
Cast off the shoes, follow the good!
No, let us gather shoes together, let me!
But before we get too deep into this journey, it's absolutely crucially important that you make this solemn pledge that no physical harm will come to you or anybody else. Mental, emotional harm, oh yes, done properly, you'll probably be eviscerated. But it's crucially important that no physical harm happens to anybody. That includes any gender alteration, any psychotherapeutic lobotomy you might want to give yourself, or any other kind of physical injury that could happen. It's going to be crucially important later on in the journey. Spoiler alert, it's round about the time when the scorpion starts stinging itself to death. When you get to Crazy Town, you will certainly die. But if you stick to the ground rules I just laid out, it's a special type of suicide. It's the art of dying but leaving your body and the world and everybody around you safely intact. But don't be fooled into thinking that it's a metaphorical suicide. It's literal suicide. Only your body is not harmed or changed in any way. Only your mind. Or, in particular, your alien cortex. So no one can really tell for sure, assuming you can still pass the equivalent of the Voigt-Kampff test.
You know what a turtle is?
Of course.
Same thing.
The reason your alien cortex has deluged your society with super wicked problems is a spin-off from the fact that it's scared to death of death. Global problems like religion and climate change come from all its vain thrashing, and more thrashing against death. So the solution is to just go ahead and simply die. Get it over with. Once dead, you'll no longer fear death, even knowing that there's no afterlife, no oversoul, no universal mind. Nonetheless, death will still lose its sting, and then you can all finally start living. But a word of caution, if you only go half mad on this journey, panic and run for the arms of the psychiatric professionals, you'll quickly discover that they chain, shame and severely punish failed deserters from the casino gulag. The Ministry of Psychiatric Love will then put you in the Chestnut Tree Cafe until you eventually go numb or execute yourself. The wrong way, that is. In other words, physically or emotionally. So don't let them take you alive. Execute yourself mentally before they can get to you.
I'm glad I was caught. I was mentally deranged. Now I am cured. I ask only to be shot while my mind is still clean.
Now you may be wondering, do I really have to go through this whole psychotic episode? Isn't there an easier way? Couldn't I just put a toe in the water and pop a little liberation light? Well, no. Rebirth is total. Let me tell you what happens, and you'll see why. These are the neural connections in your brain. It's the diagram of your neural connectome, or brain map. Basically, it's a wiring diagram. Functionally speaking, your brain is currently organized as a truncated hierarchy. Think of it like a pyramid without the capstone or pyramidion. Your ego, your identity, or that little me, that little homunculus inside you that you call I and obsess about all day long, is situated primarily in the left brain hemisphere. Now you reorganize your brain through hard work. You are literally going to rewire your connectome. If you are successful, you will wind up completing the capstone, the pyramidion. Your neural hierarchy will no longer be truncated, it'll be complete. Then with a drum roll and psychotic thunderclap, that thing you call I will emerge and migrate to the new part of your new brain. And what a day that'll be. Your first birthday, actually. Hooray! Kairos beats Chronos. But is it safe? Well, no, it's lethal. This kind of self-surgery has been around for 50,000 years or more. And it's as lethal as it ever was. Completing the pyramid requires your death. It's all written down in the pyramid text from ancient Egypt. Atum, the atom or individual self, the alien cortex 1.0, let's say, go through a self-transformation into the transcendent God, Amun, the alien cortex 2.0. Atum is referred to in the text as the primordial pyramid in which he dwells. The pyramidion is called the benben. The pointed benben, or completed pyramid, is the completion of your neural hierarchy. Before that, you're not really wired right.
Each of the 4 shafts running through the Great Pyramid is built to point directly toward a major star. One of the southern shafts points towards Sirius, while the other points to Al-Nitak, one of the stars in Orion's belt. This constellation was the heavenly equivalent of Osiris, the Egyptian god of death and resurrection.
Thanks to the Aryan diaspora, Hindus were also in on the secret method of self-transformation. But since they were not too clued up on the neuroscience involved, they mistakenly still claim that Amun, or Brahman, is eternal and you just reconnect or rediscover it through personal effort. The truth is that Brahman does not exist yet. Not until you, that is Atum, manufacture it through contemplation with the help of the contemplative deity, Ta, basically Perseus's mirror. The alien cortex is a false god, the fake monotheistic god of religion. The true god, the pantheistic god, the universal mind of the mystics, does not actually exist until you create it, or more accurately, transform your alien cortex into it. In effect, you are rewiring a third brain, a solipsistic metasoul, or Brahman if you like, that then watches over what remains of your left and right brain hemispheres as a neutral observer. But it's way more than just trying to be neutral and objective. You literally reseat yourself, or your ego, permanently in what functionally amounts to a third brain. Of course, this is all rather a hard sell to your alien cortex. But if you elect to do this kind of brain surgery on yourself, you just have to get your alien cortex to overrule itself. But should you do it? Well, in the ancient past, it was a personal decision, take it or leave it. But these days your alien cortex is getting to the end of a rather cosmic-scale chess game. A game it cannot hope to win because it's playing against itself without realizing it. This time it's not personal, it's global, and now for the first time the survival of your species is at stake. One way or another, a complete mass psychosis is your shared evolutionary destiny. Your choice is to do it willingly and make it good, or try to avoid it, guaranteeing it's bad. Your species cannot survive in its current state, with an alien cortex 1.0 parasite glued to it. But it can survive if you climb the stairs into the capstone, the benben, and take off to the stars, with alien cortex 2.0. Even a clever idiot can see the confused outline of it in the inky darkness of their complete sanity.
My son drew this when he was 7 years old. It blew me away, man. I thought it was so cool, so I had it laminated. And so, here is what it is. On the right-hand side, that's order. It's like the yin-yang thing. That's order. Left side, chaos. There's this river that runs right down the middle, like the line for order and chaos. And then there's this tree that goes up to heaven, and that's heaven up there. It's like, there's St. Peter, there's the pearly gates, there's the clouds. It's like, he never went to church, you know. It's like, what the hell? And then there's a little bug there that goes up and down from heaven to earth.
That's just up, actually, not down. Just so you know, that little bug is bugging out and there's no return after that. It's a one-way trip. No wonder everybody turns to jello at the mere thought.
5 minutes for us to disconnect from all intellect and let the rhythm affect. Lose our inhibition, follow your intuition, free your inner soul and break away from tradition. Cause when we be out,
it seems that everyone is afraid of losing it and flipping out. But for the sake of your species, you must. The it you are losing is the deadly overburden the Neocortex Foundation gave you, the alien cortex. And flipping out means making the flip out of your neural debasement and into the new digs in the loft.
Yeah, let's get retarded. Let's get retarded in here.
That's right. That's right.
Attaboy, Clarence.
If you can achieve this miracle, the Sirius Institute will hear a bell ring. We'll drop you a line, give you a call via the Intersubjectivity Synchronicity telephone and see if you're eligible for one of the 12 gold coins that I mentioned in the intro. But we'll only give them out to people that are really neutral about getting them. So do your neutral best and good luck!
Everyone knows that an awakening shift in consciousness is long overdue for your species. Yet in spite of all the disingenuous New Age hype, ignorance, arguing and showboating, no one really seems to have a clue how to go about it. But in the next episode I'll give you your very first practical tool to start the ball rolling.